Sorry, I'm Tim Ward, Chief Executive of Learning Curve, and I'm doing the skills and learning bit because we've got colleagues from the DWP and from the local authority to talk about the other parts of the skills and learning landscape. I actually don't work for the LSC or the Skills Funding Agency, but I have been involved, as I'll explain in a minute, in quite a lot of consultations and discussions around the way things are going to work. And what I want to do is give you a quick trot over the landscape and put perhaps to some extent what David can say in context as well as other things, and then talk about what I think the implications are. It will come over some of the issues that Simon's raised, which I think are absolutely pertinent to where we are. As Simon mentioned, the LSC actually closes its doors on the 31st of March, that means that there are new arrangements for the way that provision is funded and planned indeed for people aged 16 till whenever. And the basic drive for closing the LSC down was that actually the government wants to put responsibility for 16 to 19 learning under the control of local authorities, so that there is a coherent plan and approach, this is a theory anyway, for the way that young people are supported through birth until they leave education at the age of 18. And this is all linked to raising a participation age, which I'll talk about in a moment. Now, there's a whole other area of work that the Learning and Skills Council was doing, and this is now going to the Skills Funding Agency, which is part of BIS, first acronym of the day. Sorry, Learning Skills Council, yeah, I said that. BIS is the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, Mandelson's department, which is now responsible for all post-19 education, including higher education. And the Skills Funding Agency, unlike the LSC, which has been a planning agency, has no planning responsibility at all. It will be responsible purely for paying the funding out. And as Simon said, it will also be the co-financing organisation for ESF, and that will include European social funded projects which look at 16 to 18, which will be procured by the Skills Funding Agency on behalf of local authorities. It'll also be responsible for informal adult learning through lead accountable bodies, which Debbie's going to talk to us about. It'll also be responsible for National Apprenticeship Service, and it'll also be responsible for a new service called the Adult Advancement and Career Service. Well, it's not going to be called that, it's going to be called something else apparently, but nobody would tell us what it's going to be called. And that will replace Next Step, which some of you may be familiar with, the local sort of guidance service, and also replace the Learn Direct helpline. So it'll be the idea will be a unified service. And that has been tendered out, and apparently they're also not allowed to tell us who won the tender because we're in the middle of the period when the contracts are on, contract discussions are on hold. But a person or one agency or more than one agency in the region has won this particular contract to deliver that. So 14 to 19 provision, the local authority will plan and procure, and the idea is that the local authority, which is obviously directly responsible for most schools, but it'll also be funding places in colleges and in other organisations, including third sector organisations. There is a thing called a regional planning group, which takes an overview of the general approach to this in the region. And there is a thing called the Young Persons Learning Agency, because far be it from the government to give local authorities complete control and purview over this. The YPLA is sort of there to keep an eye on the local authorities to make sure they do what the government was hoping they were going to do. And as part of that, there will be what they call a national commissioning framework, which will be a standard way in which this provision is procured. And this is all driving towards the raising of the participation age to 18, that by 2013, I think it is, all young people have to be in some form of educational training by 18. And that doesn't necessarily mean school. It's not necessarily school. It could be working with an employer and getting training, or in a college. And I'll come back to that in a minute when I talk about the implications for the voluntary sector. The Skills Funding Agency, which is the main thing we probably want to focus on today in relation to ESF in learning and skills, because we'll be hearing from DWP about the other side of it. Skills Funding Agency will be funding provision for 19 plus, so it's a sort of mini LSC. As I say, it's not a planning body. The theory is that they will put the funding where the demand is, so it will be demand-led. However, it's pretty clear that government priorities will be determining what will be funded. And the whole philosophy is about a shift of who pays for what, that the government says we will only pay for certain things and people have to pay themselves for the rest of it. I'll talk about the effect on funding that has at the moment. The LSE at the moment employs about 3,500 staff. The Skills Funding Agency will employ about 700 staff and will be a national organisation, although with a regional presence, which means that the relationship between it and the local communities who might want to benefit from the funding and from the providers is what I would call a distant relationship. It's my term, not their term, but a distant relationship. And it would be primarily based on performance management, based on data. So they'll sort of say, what did you do last year? This is what you're getting this year. And it's a take it or leave it. Very much different arrangements. And as I say, they will procure and manage 16 to 18 apprenticeships and European social funding on behalf of local authorities. Although this is about European social funding today, it's important to understand that the way that ESF is increasingly being used is to build around and complement the mainstream programmes. And one of the impacts of co-financing, which on one side looked like a good thing because it meant suddenly you didn't have to find half the funding for European. The other thing is that the European Social Fund has moved from being a demand-led programme to a programme where the priorities are determined by the co-financing organisation. And we've seen an increasing trend towards contracts being focused on what the funding body thinks appropriate rather than maybe what people locally say this is what we need in this area.